Hi everyone and welcome to this new video. In this video I want to talk about OSCP and about anxiety. So I want to link these two topics and I hope this video will provide valuable insights to those who have to take the OSCP certification or any certification in general and maybe they are feeling a little bit too anxious about it. So in this video I want to bring some thoughts on certification in the modern world and why we typically feel anxiety about OSCP and other certification. As always, if you find the video useful, please subscribe to the channel, share this video with like-minded people, the usual stuff to support the YouTube channel. And now we can actually go and talk about the topics. So I want to break down the discussion into three different parts. In the first part, I want to talk about anxiety and why do we feel anxiety typically. Then we ask ourselves, okay, do you really need OSCP? Why are you taking the certification? Various reasons for why we take such certifications. And at the end, okay, let's say that you really want to obtain OSCP, how can you tackle complex challenges in a simple way? So that's the idea. So where does anxiety come from? Well, anxiety is a protective measure of the body that comes from our evolution process. So we feel anxiety to protect ourselves. And especially in situations of uncertainty, it triggers where there could be unknown threats that could endanger our life. So anxiety has to do with uncertainty, with the potential of threats, so the possibility of danger. So when we talk about threats, we're talking about a possibility of danger, and so we feel anxiety. So it is a very natural and normal response. Now, back in the past, many years ago, when we were living, more in contact with raw nature, so to say, threats were pretty obvious and somewhat self-explanatory. I mean, threats just wanted to kill you. It was very easy. It was hard to live, but it was easy to conceptualize it in a way. It was not too hard. But then we kept developing, we kept creating complex societies, and at some point, the threats became mostly social. So they became mostly social subtleties, which means that they were hard to understand. Some of these subtleties are not that important, while some others can be crucial for our own survival. Now, among the most important desires that each human has essentially is the desire to belong to a group and also the desire to show that we can provide added value to our own group. So that's the idea. And this applies to every context, but of course then depending on the context, it takes on specific shapes. And cybersecurity is just another context in which we human gather and in which we human do stuff. And so these desires of belonging to a group and showing that we can provide added value is also applied to cybersecurity. I mean, it makes sense, right? So why do we really need OSCP? Why do we take such certifications? Well, in the context of cybersecurity, the desire to prove our worth is a very common one. It is a very hard and competitive field where many people want in, they want to work in the cybersecurity industry. Sometimes the resources are there, but sometimes the resources are limited. And I would say that most of the times the resources are still somewhat limited, meaning that we have to prove that we are good enough so that we deserve the job, because sadly there are not resources for everyone. So we need to somehow prove this. Look, I am good at this, I can prove it to you. So in such scenarios, it becomes really important to define simple signals that can be used to understand if a potential candidate has the skills a company needs. Now, to fill this gap, the need to have simple signals that can show competence, certifications have been introduced. And for example, the OSCP is a practical example of such simple signal. Due to its long existence, it seems to have lots and lots of respect, especially during the interview processes. So when you are interviewed by a human resource, maybe someone who is not too technical about the job itself, instead of asking you for the right knowledge, for the knowledge that is actually needed in that particular job, simple signals are used because they are simple. So they can just say, do you have OSCP? If you don't, I will not even allow you to describe what is your skill set and if you can actually work in this job. I'm just gonna deny you altogether. And for example, university degrees act also as simple signals. So we don't have just certification, we also have degrees. But typically, for example, if you want to work as a penetration tester, OSCP probably has more impact than a university. However, now there's two hard problems here. the idea is that it's hard to measure how impactful they are. First of all, it's hard to measure exactly what they describe about a person. Because if you want a candidate for a job, you are interviewing for people, and you have two candidates, one has OSCP, the other doesn't, what does this tell us about these people? It's really hard to say. In general, you could say, okay, the one who had OSCP went through an exam, they went through a study course. Even though the OSCP is not too complex, it still showcases dedication to the craft, and so it showcases some ability. That makes sense. But maybe the person who doesn't have OSCP took all the time, instead of doing OSCP, to do personal projects, to develop his skill set in a vertical, in a vertical area that is needed for the job. He made a lots of real life projects with real impact. He found some vulnerabilities, some CVs in open source projects. So it's really hard to tell how impactful they are. Nowadays, personally, I think that OSCP is the so-called victim of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what does it mean? It means that essentially it works like this. Everyone around me says that OSCP is meaningful. I ask my colleagues, I ask people on Reddit, everyone will say the same thing. OSCP is meaningful, it allows you to pass through interview processes. Since everyone around me says the same thing, I will also think that OSCP is meaningful, and so I will also say to other people, look, OSCP is meaningful, I will also take it, whatever, etc., etc. And this is regardless of the real impact that OSCP has. And this actually comes back to the fact that the importance of the social nature of our coming together cannot be overstated. I mean, the real impact of OSCP is not really determined by OSCP itself, but it's extremely determined by how people talk about OSCP. Depending on how people talk about it, it will have different impacts. So if everyone says that it's meaningful, it becomes meaningful, even if by itself it doesn't really say anything about the technical skill of an individual. I'm not saying that this is what OCP says, but the point is that regardless of what OCP actually is, regardless of how hard, how structured, and what it contains, regardless of its contents, if people say that it's meaningful, it will become meaningful on a social sense, in a social way, regardless of the technical part. So each personal life, however, is a bit different from the others, and this is obvious. So even though OSCP is regarded as a simple signal to showcase your ability, it does not mean that it is the only path. And this brings me to the following point. Before taking a certification such the OSCP one, I would suggest to truly ask yourself first, why am I doing it? Why am I taking the OSCP? Now, the reasons could be many and different. Maybe you're taking it because you really want to challenge it yourself and you want to see if OffSec can bring a worth challenge. You have the money for it, or maybe the companies you work for will pay for it. So on the economical side, you can take that sort of risk and you just want to challenge yourself. Or maybe you can take it because you want to prove to others that you are actually good in this field and that you deserve your place. Or you can take it so that you will be able to find different jobs in the future in an easier way, because you can pass through HR without too many issues. Of course, the answers could also be multiple, like you want to challenge yourself, but also you say maybe it's also useful in terms of looking for future jobs. It does not have to be only one. So it does not matter which is the answer. I would say just find your own answer, and in general, do not take a certification out of a blind acceptance of its value. Take it because you decided that it is worth it. You decided to maybe even see if it is worth it. Of course, the popular view on the certification will inevitably influence our choices. So we will try OSCP instead of another one less known. That makes sense. But in general, try to answer why you are taking it. And be careful of not confusing the certification with your own value, because in my opinion, those are very different things. And finally, I will also suggest to not take the OSCP if you feel desperate about proving your own value, because if you are in this state, what you need is not really a certification. You need to understand first your true value, and then you can challenge yourself with certifications. I don't think it's a good idea to take the OSCP in order to prove yourself too much. A little bit is okay, but too much is probably not good, because ultimately what's gonna happen is that if you really feel desperate about proving your own value, you can even take the certification, but you will still feel like a void, like you still need to prove your own value, because proving your own value is something you have to do to yourself, not to other people. And so in this regard, certifications do not always help, in my opinion. For example, in my experience of taking the certification is that I took it because it was offered by the company I was working with. So I had the economical opportunity. I did not have to spend my own money on it. And so I was like, okay, let's challenge myself. Let's see if I can do it. It was a challenge to myself given that economically I was offered the opportunity to take it. So I did feel a bit of anxiety in the coming up to the exam because of course there is like an inherent uncertainty in the certification itself and in the exam that you never really know until you do it. And also because I did not want to disappoint people at my company, my colleagues, and my boss. I mean, they had paid for it, especially my boss had paid for it. So I was like, okay, let's prove him that I'm worth it. So there was a little bit, of course, wanting to prove myself. A little bit, it's natural, but I also knew that if worst came to worst and I failed the exam, that would not mean that I was bad in this field. So I had that knowledge, which allowed me to take the challenge as a challenge and not as a way to prove who I was. So remember that a single performance does not reflect on the competence acquired in years of study and practice. This is really important. Performing is good, it's actually necessary to grow. Having performances here and there is very, very important, actually, part of the growth process. But ultimately, if you have a bad performance, that does not reflect on the competence you can acquire in years and years of study, which is what I suggest. You just go and study and study and study, and then every once in a while you perform to see what is your current skill level, and depending on the results of your performance, you can decide what to do next with respect to your study path in a way. It's also okay to feel bad if you have a bad performance. That's just human. It's just human emotions. But the idea is that, okay, I have a bad performance. It does not mean that what I'm doing with the years of study is useless, because it will prove in the long term if I just keep at it, if I really want it. So let's say now that you are really interested in obtaining a certification such as the OSCP one. So you need a strategy to do it, because it's not just, okay, I want to prove myself. You need to do it in a structured way with a proper strategy. Now for this, I suggest a very simple 3-step approach. Now here I say it's simple. It does not mean that these steps themselves are simple. It means that the overall strategy is simple. It is made up of 3 different steps. The first one is study the enemy. The second one is prepare for the battle. And the third one is free yourself from expectations. So in the first step, which is study the enemy, this is all about preparation. So this is the most boring, yet it is the most important part. This is the part where you try to understand with as much detail as possible what you will have to do in the final performance, what you are preparing against, what is the final enemy actually. So that's the idea. To help in this step, you must have consistency and you must find the right resources that will describe in the most objective way the challenge that you will face. And for example, you can check out my OSCP guide in the channel. This is about 12 modules of 6.5 hours. I tried my best to make it as objective as possible. Of course, there's a little bit of my opinion on it, clearly, but I was really focusing on just describing the knowledge itself, the way it is structured, and I hope it can bring some added value to it. Here there's a link you can find on my YouTube channel. I also wrote a blog post on my blog. I'm gonna put the links in the description down below. So, I said that this is the most boring yet important part. Why? Because studying every day a little bit does not give you emotional like awakening in a way. I mean, emotionally it's the boring part. Emotionally you don't feel anything when you just studying every day at least 1, 2, 3 hours. But this is also why it's the most important part. And I would say that this step, the first one, the preparation step, is where most people actually fail. They do not prepare enough, and then they just do not have the tools, they just do not have the knowledge required to actually win the performance, to actually do the performance well. Because they got bored during the studying, emotionally they just zone out, they did not do the study, they skipped the preparation, and so they were not ready. So this is why this is the most critical part, because it is boring. It will not activate you emotionally. You just have to have the consistency, which is the hardest thing to have, to study every day and to keep track of progress. And this is why finding resources that give you an objective view on the subject is really important, because they allow you, it's sort of like an emotional structure. They give you a structure on the knowledge that you can then use to remember, okay, I was here, I still need to understand well this topic, I have those topics instead I have under my belt, so I know them, they are not problem. So that's the idea. And once again, you can check out my guide. So this step is all about studying and practicing. It is the most boring, yet the most important. And most people, as I said, in my opinion, they make mistakes exactly in this step. So the second step inside is about preparation. So now we have all the knowledge we need, but now we need to prepare. So once you know the enemy, you must prepare to fight it. So preparation is its own step, because it does not matter the knowledge you gather. Now you must shape that knowledge with respect to the specific enemy you're facing. So this step requires a significant amount of self-awareness, because in this step you must understand how you work in order to readjust yourself for facing the new challenge. So you have the knowledge, but now you must change the shape of this knowledge. You must create specific elements out of this general knowledge that will help you in this specific performance. So practically, this step is all about preparing methodologies, cheat sheets, tools that will work for you for the performance, in this case for the OSCP certification. So this is the step where the problem becomes yours. So when you take in the stuff, the knowledge, and you say, okay, I have to actually do this in the real world in practice, how would I solve the problem? So it's not about understanding the problem in general with respect to like a knowledge-based approach. It is about to like understand how you would solve the problem. So your personal approach to getting all the knowledge that you have, but using it in a way that allows you to actually solve the problem you need to solve. So the third step is not about self-awareness, nor studying or practicing. At this point, we have all the knowledge we need. We have shaped in a way that works for us. So we have added that self-awareness step. Now it is all about instinct and intuition. We have to turn off that part of the awareness that uses language, and we have to become more primal in this way. So we have to develop instinct and intuition that will act in the moment. So to access these hidden and deep parts of our bodies and minds, it becomes necessary actually to let go of expectations, because instincts and intuition can only emerge when the more abstract part of the mind, the more language oriented part of the mind just goes away. Not completely, of course, but the idea is that it has to let space, it has to create some space for instinct and intuition. And this, like for doing this, I notice on myself that it becomes really important to just let go of expectation. If we have too many expectation, if we impose too much expectation on the performance itself, we just become stuck. We just keep having the same thoughts in our brain. So in this part, it's all about letting go of thoughts. So letting go of language. This step can only be truly reached if we thoroughly study our enemy and if we prepare for it as much as possible. But after all this preparation, there's nothing else we can do. We just have to let go and just trust the deep part of our mind that, as I said, uses intuition and instincts, and that will guide us through the final leap, the final victory. And so this is it for my simple 3-step approach. I know it can sound very abstract, but that's actually in practice how I deal with complex problems. First, I study a lot what I'm doing, what I have to do. I study the enemy. Then I prepare for the battle. So I take all that knowledge and I shape it in a way that works for me. And finally, I just let go of the expectation and I try to use intuition as much as possible. Of course, it does not mean that we cannot be afraid, that we cannot feel anxiety. What it means though is that we are not overwhelmed by those emotions, because at some level we let go of expectation. Maybe not completely, but to the point where intuition can emerge. So that's the idea. And so this is it for the topic. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about certification. Why did you take your OSCP if you want to take other certification? Or maybe why you choose to not take certification to prove your value? And what are the other ways in which you prove your value without certification? I think as humans, as human societies, it is important to understand that certification are just simple signals. However, they are not the only signals that work. For example, I am making YouTube videos where I explain technical topics. This can also be seen as a signal that I know my stuff, that I'm able to explain complex ideas. And maybe you can do the same. Or you can write a technical blog post, or you can write some code that does interesting stuff in the field of cybersecurity. So there are many different ways of proving our own value, and certification is just one of them. So let me know what you think, subscribe to the channel, share this video with like-minded people, and the usual good stuff to support the YouTube channel. See you to the next video.